Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're looking at international business and globalization, and we are focusing on still week 1 and PowerPoint slides 4. And we're going to be looking at the different factors and economic systems that companies have to review when thinking about going internationally. So some of the economic factors include the environmental domains in terms of cultural, political, legal and economic elements, and they need to think about types of economic environment, the degree of economic freedom, drivers of economic performance and the orientation of economic systems, which are then linked to your vision, your strategy, your organizational operations. So again, the chart that managers must be able to navigate the type of economic environment, the degree of economic freedom, drivers of economic performance and orientation of economic systems. So this is very, very important. And when we now look at different types of economic environments, they include the economies of developed, developing, and economies in transition, and their degrees of development in terms of transition as well. A developed economy is an economy that has a robust economic environment marked by wide-ranging activities, efficient capital movement, stable institutions, extensive infrastructure, international trade and investments, advanced technologies, and a higher economic freedom. Whereas developing economies are generally have an uneven economic environment that is marked by narrow market activities, inefficient capital movement, resistance to foreign ownership, trade restrictions, imperfect competition, unstable institutions, limited infrastructure, sketchy technologies, and lower economic freedom. And economies in transition, well, here we're talking about a great range marks the economic performance among developing economies, precisely because different economies experience different levels of developing at different rates. At the low end, countries marred by fragile political institutions, heavy indebtedness, poorly performing markets, and ongoing conflict, such as Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so on and so forth. So again, these things need to be taken into consideration. When we're talking about the degrees of development, so in absolute terms, globalization expanded the economy for all. In relative terms, though, many countries, prospered, some more than others, and a few not at all. Different reasons explain different levels of economic development in different countries. Analysis, directs attention to the economic, political, legal, and the cultural moderators of development, which we're going to see in the. So again, we're going to see here the forces affecting the degrees of development. And even if you look at progress and prosperity, economic factors, political, legal factors, and the cultural factors, progress and prosperity, advocating of economic freedom, like industry or service-based activities, business efficiency, degree of literacy. Economic factors in terms of poverty and productivity, land, labor, capital, technology factors, cultural factors in terms of religious versus secular schooling, size and stability of the middle class. This map here shows the economies that are emerging around the world. So economic freedom. What is the economic freedom and the economic freedom index? Well, the economic freedom is the absolute right of property ownership, fully realized freedoms of movement of labor, capital and goods, and an absolute absence of the cohesion or constraints of economic liberty beyond the extent necessary for citizens to protect and maintain liberty itself. Economic freedom can assist in economic development. Economically free countries support activities that create income and generate wealth. Successful entrepreneurs map paths that others follow and build their lives. Economic freedoms does not, signify the absence of government, but ultimately the freedom requires protections from those governments. And the Economic Freedom Index, well, the Economic Freedom Index, estimates the economic freedom in a particular nation. In principle, this index measures the degree that a nation accepts the Adam Smith's thesis that, basic institutions that protect the liberty of individuals to pursue their own economic interests result in greater prosperity for the larger society as a whole. Now, this chart shows the economic freedom and standard of living, and again, we can see here the in terms of GDP per capita and GDP per capita by region, for example. And here, economic freedom classifications, and we have different classifications for classifying different countries on a scale from 80 to 100, which are free, 70 to 79.9, mostly free, 60 to 69.9, which are moderately free, 50 to 59.9, which is mostly free, and 0 to 49.9, which is repressed. And we can see the classes of free, mostly free, moderately free, and then we can see the general classifications. And the general classifications, for example, if we take the 80 to 100, negotiable or nominal government interference in the economy, slight corruption or risk of exploitation, government guarantees, property rights. If we go to the other end of the scale, then in terms of being repressed, and private property ownership is at best weakly protected, at worst outlawed. The state owns some to all property, and directly produces goods and services. But this may not be a good thing if the government, which we'll talk about later, are just producing in terms of a command economy, producing everything. So again, but this chart here shows the classifications of economic freedom source and linked to general characteristics. This map here shows the economic freedom, so we can see which countries have the 80 to 100, which we can see in New Zealand and Australia, these countries down to your right. And then the next bunch of countries in green, 70 to 79.9, which are mostly free, and you can see the red countries on the other spectrum, which are not ranked, or the purple being from 0 to 49.9. So again, this shows the economic freedom from different countries from around the world. Now, we need to look and think about different types of economic systems. And we have different types of economic systems, including the market economies, command economies, and mixed economies. So, we're talking about a market economy. This is anchored by the values of capitalism, economic systems whereby individuals, rather than the government, make most of the decisions in a market economy. It is anchored by the doctrine of capitalism, and it's this thesis that private ownership, confers ineligible property rights and legitimize the profits earned by one's initiative, investment, and risk. Optimal resources allocation follows from consumers exercising their freedom of choice and producers responding accordingly. If we think about the command economy, a command economy is, communism champions this type of philosophy: state ownership of resources, control of economic activity, normally a political ideology. Communism calls for, classes and ultimately stateless society based on the government's command of the economy. So, and then and from each according to its ability to each according to its need is the philosophy of communism. Implementing this system requires the state to adopt a command economy in which it owns and controls the factors of production. And then we have a mixed economy. So mixed economies, most economies broadly labeled as mixed economies, fall between the market and the command type. A mixed economy is a system which has economic decisions based on the principles of being market driven, and ownership is largely private, but the government does intervene from time, from a little to a lot, in the value of assets, allocating resources, regulating activities, and organizing markets. Put simply, the state reasons that it is the government's responsibility to make strategic decisions about strategic industries. And we've seen this from time to time. We've seen this in the UK with regards to the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and even though the banks were privately owned and they were looking like they were going to go into liquidation because they didn't have the resources to pay their creditors, then it was looking like they were going to go into liquidation, and it was something that the UK government wasn't prepared to accept, and so bailed out these banks at the appropriate time. And there were some industries that they were previously privatized, like British Gas, and they made private. Public companies. They were previously public companies, and they privatized. So the government may take strategic decisions to make public organizations private, or if they think an industry is failing, they could make that industry sector and the companies in those industries public and take ownership. So this next slide explains the economic systems again from what we previously discussed in terms of a command, mixed, and market. Command being, more government owned, most of the resources, advocates centralization, large scale capital intensive production. The mixed being government and private ownership of economic resources mixed in various proportion, advocates optimizing economic efficiency, promoting and preparing self-interest, market size, mostly private or business ownership of resources, advocates decentralization, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So these are the degrees of freedom, and that's something that you would need to look at in terms of, making sure that you want to go into that type of economic system, and that aligns with your overall marketing strategy and visions of your company, as well as looked at in the first slide. Now we need to assess as well the economic development, performance, and potential. The economic development can be assessed in different ways. We can look at the GNI, the gross national income, the GDP, the gross domestic product, and the GNP, the gross national product, in terms of assessing an economy, a country's development and performance potential. If we look at the gross national income, GNI, in its broadest measure of a country's economic performance, it's that it has four components: personal consumption, business investments, government spending, and net exports to business services. A GDP, this is the total market value of all outputs produced within a nation's borders, no matter whether it's generated domestically or by foreign ownership, over a fixed period of time. All the output that's been produced over a given period of time within that country, whether it's domestically or foreign owned. And then gross national product, GNP, this begins by estimating the market value of goods and services produced in a given year by the labor, assets, and capital supplied by the resident of the countries. It then adds the income that its citizens earned by working abroad, but removes the income earned by foreigners working domestically. The latter counts towards their home nations, GNP. Okay. But there are other economic analytics that one could use to determine how well a country is performing. And some of these include the rate of economic growth, the population size, and the purchasing power parity. The rate of an economic growth, monetary aggregates take a statistic snapshot of an economy at any given time. Hence, they do not capture its rate of change. Interpreting the present, forecasting future performance prompts considering an economy's growth rate. So the rate of growth, is it really attractive that the rate of growth is growing so fast that you want to be in it, because then you're going to benefit from that. Population size, managers routinely adjust indicators by the number of people who live in a country. 0.88 in a country, this conversion is sensible given how uneven the world's population are. 7.5 billion people around the world. In China alone, there are 1.38 billion people. In India, 1.26 billion people. And in other countries, lower. So adjusting GNI by population, therefore, lets managers, qualify a country's performance by its demographics. And then, purchasing power parity. This is where the prices of goods and services vary from country to country due to, among other things, differing favor endowments, productivity rates, and, regulations. So, these elements can also be taken into consideration. Another area that needs to be taken into consideration is the possibility of shadow economics. So, shadow economics found anywhere and everywhere. The shadow economy includes extra legal activities, e.g. driving, an unlicensed taxi, street trading or unregistered daycare center, as well as illegal doings such as prostitution, drug, illicit gambling, cigarette and alcohol smuggling, product piracy, that fall beyond the official statistics. Besides conducting business in hard-to-track cash, shadow players typically go to great lengths to hide illicit transactions or dodge taxes. The off-the-books activities of the shadow economy evade and therefore confound official performance estimates. So the official performance estimate. This table here shows the 10 largest economies. 10 largest economies looking at the country, the population and the GDP by PPP and as a percentage of total wealth to the economy. And we can see number 1 is China, and number 10 is the UK. China representing in terms of total world economy 16.5%, United States 16%, and the United Kingdom at 2.4% at the other end of the spectrum. There are other sustainability and economics other elements that need to be taken into consideration when looking at how attractive one country is, rather than just PPP or GDP or other analytical tools. There are others, including green economics. Green economics holds the economy as a component of and dependent upon the natural world, measuring the monetary, quantity of the quality of the market activity through GNI, GNP and GDP, without accounting for the associated social and ecological costs that result from the activity generated. The growth misestimates performance and misrepresents the potential of that country. Sustainability itself, again, is very, very important. Sustainability in terms of net national product, genuine progress indicators, and human development index. Sustainability endorses a broader, accounting of the gains and costs of growth that fall beyond the monetary metrics, but help gauge an economic environment, net national product, which measures the depletion of natural resources and the degradation of the environment that result from making and consuming those products. Just as a company depletes its tangible and intangible assets when making a product, so too should countries. So NNP does this by depreciating the country's assets, and the wear and tear in the generating of growth. If we're looking at the genuine progress indicators, GPI, these begin by applying the same accounting framework used to calculate GDP. It then adjusts for the corresponding costs of reduced environmental quality, health and hygiene, in likelihood security, equity, free time, educational attainment. For example, unlike GDP, GPI values voluntary and unpaid household work as paid labor and subtracts the costs of crime, pollution, and family stress. Effectively, GDP and GPI are analogues to gross profits versus net profits. Accounting for all costs converts gross to net. Accordingly, GPI will equal zero if the cost of pollution, crime, and family troubles, holding all of the factors, constant, equal to the monetary gains and the production of goods and services. So again, thinking of an accounting system, you have your sales of the whole country, your cost of goods sold, take away from your sales gives you your gross profit, take away your expenses, and you're thinking about the sustainability costs of GPI are more the expenses. What are the expenses that could take away from your gross profit to leave your net profit? And does your net profit come to zero or minus zero? So what does it come to? And then we have the HDI, the Human Development Index. And matters of human development do not show up immediately, in income or growth measures. Ultimately, the reasoning goes that they will be given and improving the human conditions through better nutrition, education, healthcare, and hygiene improves economic performance. And, where does sustainability come from? Why are these important? Well, we had the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, when 182 countries met and they agreed to becoming more sustainable in terms of different areas. And sustainability was defined in the Brundtland report in Agenda 21. And they looked at sustainability. When you equate that to, for example, the tourism and hospitality sectors, well, this is split into 3 or 4 different pillars. Is split into which is very similar to this in terms of the environmental aspects, in terms of the social aspects, in terms of the economic aspects, and also now in terms of the 4th pillar of sustainability, including the ecological or the ozone layer. So these there are other economic analysis indicators that one could look at to determine how attractive an economy is. And these include the Happynomics, the YBLI, the GNWI, and the HPI. In terms of the YBLI, Your Better Life Index, the GNWI, the Gross National Wellness Index, and the HPI, the Happy Planet Index. And these are additional analytics that could be taken into consideration when looking at interpreting the indicators of economic development, performance, and potential. The YBLI, developed by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. The YBLI advocates evaluating the economic performance in terms of matters that people worldwide believe are important. And these include housing, jobs, social relationships, health, security, work, family balance, education, but that fall beyond the narrow scope of just monetary measures. And then we have the GNWI, the Gross National Wellness Index. Others contend that material and spiritual development occur side by side. One reinforces the other, or both suffer. GNWI measures a country's capacity to promote individual well-being in terms of mental health, work, income, social relations, economic retirement, political and environmental standards. And then we have the Happy Planet Index, the HPI. Utilitarian view holds that people aspire to live long, healthy, ecological, sensitive lives. However, a country helps its citizens to do so while not infringing on the opportunity of future generations and people in countries to do the same. Fully represents its economic performance and potential. And again, I think these are other indicators, and even if you link these indicators to other theories in terms of motivational theories, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Hertzberg two-factor theories, Mayo's theory, the Hawthorne studies in terms of motivation theory. Well, why is that important? That's important because the people there are going to be working in your industries. And is a happy worker a productive worker, or a productive worker a happy worker? And what we're talking about here is maximizing the efficiencies, effectiveness, and maximizing productivity and efficiency within your organization. But your most valuable asset are going to be the people. So how happy your people are in the countries that they are is going to. So these key components of economic analysis, to 8 key components of economic analysis, which includes the balance of payments, deflation, foreign direct investment, income distribution, inflation, misery index, poverty, public debt, and unemployment. So when looking at where you're going to invest and look at international business, there are other key components of economic analysis that needs to be taken into consideration rather than just one economic analysis analytical tool like GDP, or just looking at your company in terms of how cheaply you can achieve what you need to achieve. Everything really does need to be taken into consideration. So what are emerging markets? Emerging markets feature rapid growth and industrialization. Label as indistinct, and membership varies with source. Usually members are Brazil, China, Indonesia, and India. Transition economies, those changing from a centrally planned economy to a free market, are also in this group. And more can be seen on the IMF, emerging markets. And emerging markets provide opportunities for multinational corporations and enterprises. So emerging markets comprise of the majority of the world's people, 80%, and 75% of the land, and they continue to grow faster than the developed world. Emerging markets are diverse in culture, language, and politics, expected to grow further and consolidate an economic business power and to exceed the GDP of developed countries within 2 decades. And global growth per person now lead by the emerging economies and are still burgeoning population that reached 7 billion last year and is expected to reach 8 billion by 2024, are combined to put unprecedented stress on the world's ecosystems. Well-developed physical financial infrastructure, including central banks, commercial banks, and stock exchanges, but have less well-developed processes and systems of accounting, governance, and regulation. So, in other words, it's going to be higher risk. And there's another aspect to emerging markets. The other aspect that we've talked about previously are that people are traveling more. People are going to see different parts of the world because it's cheaper to travel. People are more adventurous, so people's preferences are changing, and as people's consumers' preferences change, so does the needs of people's change. And as the needs of people change, then companies going international or global or multinational need to then consider the needs and these other markets as being very, very attractive, especially as they're growing at such a fast rate. So they cannot be discounted. IMF groupings include emerging markets and developing economies, composed of over 151 countries. Developing Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Middle East and North Africa, and the Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, more can be seen on this link below. FTSE groupings, FTSE, the Financial Times Stock Exchange FTSE uses its country classification review process to identify 9 advanced and 13 secondary emerging markets. Advanced including countries like Brazil, Czech Republic, Hungary, Malaysia, Mexico, Poland, South Africa, Taiwan, and Turkey. And the secondary countries including Chile, China, Colombia, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Morocco, Pakistan, Peru, Philippines, Russia, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. So again, we can see, advanced and secondary type groupings. Morgan Stanley, the capital investment in terms of the MSCI Emerging Market Index, comprised of 26 countries in 3 regions as follows: the Americas, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Venezuela. Europe, in terms of the Middle East and Africa, Czech Republic, Egypt, Hungary, Israel, Jordan, Morocco, Poland, Russia, South Africa, and Turkey. And Asia, including China, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand. So we can see how the emerging market index with the Morgan Stanley Capital International. And here we can see a play on acronyms: BRICS countries, MINT, MIST, MIKT, CIVETS, and the next 11 countries. The role in the global economy, and we can see companies that have gone global. Starbucks, Burger King, Costco, Memoric, IBM, Time Warner, Facebook, Goldman's, McDonald's, Hilton, and a wide range, Procter and Gamble, a wide range of other value to countries listed firms. Are emerging markets going to cause the next global crash? That's what we're going to be doing in the class in groups. So there's something you could look at: are emerging markets going to cause the next global crash? What do you think? We're going to discuss this in class. Emerging markets. Over the next 2 decades, the big emerging markets, the BEM, will hold the greatest potential for UK exports. Largest EBMs include Chinese Economic Area, including China, Hong Kong region, and Taiwan, India, CIS in terms of Russia, Central Asia, South Korea, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. So each BEM offers opportunities and challenges for local policymakers, businesses, and international businesses and economic communities. Here we can see again different developed markets, emerging markets, and growth markets and their potentials. And so a company only has so much resources, so it needs to be planned well in terms of what is the strategy for your organization and where do you want to go and why, and how does that investment in that country best meet the needs of your vision and mission of your company itself. Changing economic systems in terms of centrally planned economy, mixed economy, and market economy that we looked at, in terms of either being more towards government ownership or private ownership in terms of a command or a market economy, or is it going to be in the middle? What type of economic system are you going to be entering into? And all of these will have implications for your business for the long term. The paradigm shifts in markets from developed countries, developing countries, to emerging markets. Developing countries are more risk, economically and technological, not advanced or backwards. Consumers had poor purchasing power and few opportunities for businesses. And emerging markets, you know, risk becomes more manageable, higher income growth than developed nations, technological more competitive, increased consumer purchasing power, and offers many opportunities like untapped markets. Challenges for entering emerging markets. Again, we're going to do this activity, and we're going to do an activity here which in groups of 3. Investigate the companies listed below, review the slides you've covered today, and identify specific challenges these companies are likely to face when entering new international markets. Make notes on the groups and challenges into 3 categories: Virgin Media, Morrison's, and SAB Miller. Emerging Middle East and North Africa. Again, these markets are emerging, highly populated, developing markets. The countries we can see here: Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Kuwait, Libya, and many others. So the business environment of ME. So the trade environment needs to be reviewed. Export centres around EU regions, particularly North Africa. Regional integration is low. A better integration will help. Trade restrictiveness, average 10% across imports, is holding back the region, but reforms are slowly being made. The IMF stats indicates openness in line with emerging Asia can rise GDP by 1% annually, and growth must come from the private sector, and that requires reform in the economy, removing regulations, relaxing government control, promoting trade, and bolstering the rule of law. So, will the political dynamics help? So these are the questions you need to be thinking about if you are thinking about Africa as in terms of an emerging market and tapping into this marketplace. Macro issues: inward FDI, financial direct investment in the Middle East and North Africa. $650 million in May in 2013 alone in regions like Qatar and UAE, hotspots for international investors. Bloated public sectors with state-owned enterprises lack transparency and corruption. Unemployment is particularly acute among the youth, 15 to 24-year-olds, averaging 25% of MENA region, which is significantly higher than 17.3% of the OECD area. Gender imbalances and skills mismatch. Spikes in food and fuel prices, which have most powerfully affected the low and middle classes. And high inflation, the product of high dependence on fuel and food imports, represents a major challenge for resource poor countries. So these are some of the macro issues that needs to be reflected in your situation analysis in terms of your environment that you need to be thinking about if you're looking as a company investing in those type of marketplaces. Business environment: the rise of SMEs, small to medium enterprises. Again, buys Jordanian internet startup Maktub for 120 million in 2009. Rise of the private sector, still dominated by family businesses and political link networks and state-owned enterprises. The emergence of key states as actors in the world: Qatar and World Cup 2022, rebuilding 22 stadiums in Africa. So, business environment. What is the business environment like in that country that you're thinking about investing in, or that area or that region? So thank you today from Mr. Tan. I hope that has helped. We will be doing a lot more work of this in class.